Hey, good morning, church. Yeah. Jill, I'll give that same disclaimer. Those are terrible pieces of advice, okay? So just in case you try that, you don't get to blame me, all right? Hey, our fourth, fifth, and sixth graders, if you guys are still in here, you guys can go on up just right over here to your classroom. Robbie's up there to teach this morning. We are so excited this morning as we have one of our missionaries, as I stated earlier, from Thailand here. This is Matt Miller and his wife, Bobby Joe. I don't know where she's sitting now. I knew where she was first service. Back here, over here somewhere, Bobby Joe, and their kids, Jude and Lexi. We are really excited to have them here. I think Matt was kind of excited to speak about something, other than kind of a missions presentation for a while. So he's preaching along with this idea of how to wreck your life. Would love for you guys to get the chance to get to talk to Matt a little bit after the service. They do some amazing things in Thailand. I was reading on his website that there are 66 million unchurched or unreached people in Thailand. It's an overwhelming number. And I think what's really cool is the approach to ministry they take there, focusing on discipleship, focusing on growing disciples, and then the outreach kind of happens naturally from that. So anyways, hope you get a chance to talk to him. I'm super excited for you guys to be able to hear the message this morning. So would you give me a hand in welcoming Matt this morning?
So yeah, it's incredibly exciting. Anytime somebody asks you, hey, do you want to come and give some really bad advice? I'm like, yeah, that's a terrific idea. I've never really gotten to do that, I've done that accidentally, but I get to do that on purpose. So I'm really excited about today. And to add kind of to Andy's video, I found some other really bad advice that people have received. Anybody like a Jimmy Fallon fan or anything like that? Yeah, so I kind of am, but my wife, more or less, she tells me about different things that are going on these late shows. And one thing that he loves to do is have people tweet. If you know what tweeting is and Twitter is, tweet about some really bad advice that they received. So just a few of the highlights, some of my favorites. So one guy said, when I was in Boy Scouts and we went camping and my scout leader said, just use the leaves to wipe, and the leaves were poison ivy leaves. That is awesome. Awesome, great advice. Another one said, don't worry, baking soda and baking powder are the same thing, right? So, and that, especially guys in this room, that would be bad advice, because some of us would be like, oh, okay, I'll just put some baking powder in here and brownies will be made, or baking soda, which I don't know, right? So another one, I gave a stranger super specific instructions on how to get somewhere, and then after she left, I realized I was thinking of the wrong place. So that's awesome. If you're on the receiving end of that, that's, thanks for your help. So I decided to participate in this and do my own tweet. This is my first tweet in over 2 years, right? So I'm surprised my account was active. And I tweeted this. Somebody advised me when I was a child, your boogies are dead brain cells. Anybody else, were you told that? Okay, I'm alone. If you eat those guys, you can bring the dead cells back to life, and you can be super smart. So thank you for that. I stand here today super smart as the lone boogie eater. That's not true, is it? So sometimes we receive bad advice, and later on we can laugh about it, right? And that's okay, like everything that we've seen so far. But other times we receive bad advice, and it can be absolutely crushing. It can devastate us. It can destroy us. And so this morning, I want to give you more of that, right? Some bad advice that if you do the 4 things that we're going to talk about today, you will absolutely, it will be devastating to your life. And specifically, I'm going to advise you on how to be discontent. So if you came in, you walked in this morning and you're like, I really want to be dissatisfied with my life. I just never want to have joy. I want to always chase after contentment, but not ever actually have it. You're in the right place, because we're going to tell you how to continue on or become discontent and dissatisfied with your life. Last week, Andy introduced this series, and he talked about how to be a lukewarm Christian, and he gave you 4 ways that you can do that. And so I'm going to follow along with that and give you 4 ways that you can be discontent. Now, I think if I really thought about it and we collectively put our minds together, we could think of a lot more ways that you can be discontent. But I'm going to give you 4 surefire ways that you can do this. And I want to get right into it. So here's the first way that we can do this. Believe that joy is dependent upon circumstances, your circumstances, whatever is happening in your life. Now, some of us, we look at that and we say, I already know that's a bad idea. I already know that's bad advice. If that's you, let me ask you this. How often do you adhere to this? So on the one hand, you're like, I know this isn't right, but how often do I adhere? And we live by this principle. We think that our joy and our contentment is contingent upon what's going on in our lives. And what ultimately happens when you follow this, when you believe this? Joy and contentment become things that kind of ebb and flow. Joy and contentment become things that you might somewhere down the line, somewhere down the road, out there in the future, you might grab hold of contentment, but right now, in the here and now, you never have it. I have a friend in Thailand, a 62-year-old taxi driver. Some of you guys remember me talking about him in the past. I got to baptize him 3 years ago. He's one of my very, very best friends in this world, and his name is Choke. And Choke's go-to phrase, he speaks both English and Thai. That's from driving all us foreigners around for all those years. His go-to phrase, though, is in the future. And he says it kind of funny, in the future, in the future, ... So he's talking about his 16-year-old daughter that has autism, and she dropped out of school a long time ago because they go to a special school, and they're still allowed to hit them with rulers and all kinds of bad things. So she obviously doesn't like school, but we both talk about like that stinks, but maybe you could find a school where that doesn't happen and send her there. And it's always, yeah, Matt, in the future. Like, dude, she's 16, and when I met her, she was 13, and like in 2 more years, she's going to be 18. When is this future going to come about? He always has financial struggles. He works 60 hours a week. He's not really good about the money that he does have and managing that. And again, when we talk about retirement, because you're 62, man, it's down the road. But when he talks about financial security, when he talks about being able to save some money up, it's always this idea in the future. We even talk about, hey man, you should come visit us in America. That'd be all right. In the future, I will do this. His whole life kind of exists in the future. And I think many of us, whether we admit it or not, whether we say it like he does or not, I think we live the same way. We live saying, I'm going to have contentment, I'm going to have joy, I'm going to be satisfied when this happens. Once this relationship is restored, once my finances are finally in order, once my career is back on track, once we move into our dream home, once we have a child, once we get these crazy teenagers out of our house, right? Once we finally pay off their college debt and pay off all of our debt, once the doctors figure out what is wrong, once the doctors fix what is wrong, once this storm that's happening right now finally passes, we'll be content. How many of us live like that? We think it's just this next thing that has to happen, and once that thing happens, finally, we can have joy. But is it true? Is it true? Like, do we continually have joy once that thing happens, or is it actually true that something else happens, that there's something else that comes up, that there's this other circumstance that's not taken care of, and it prevents us from having that joy that we seek? Yeah, I think that's the truth. And Paul, he knows this all too well, and that's why Paul, he writes this: rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in what kind of circumstances? All circumstances, for this is God's will, not his desire. It's his will for you in Christ Jesus. So apparently Paul didn't get this memo that said, hey guys, we only rejoice when rejoicing is called for. We only rejoice when there is a party. We only rejoice when life is good. He didn't get that memo that our joy depends on our circumstances. He says rejoice always and give thanks in all circumstances. In Philippians, don't turn there, we'll get to there later. In Philippians, he says, I actually figured out the secret to being content. And we'll get to that in a few minutes. So clearly, contentment and joy, as they're spoken of in God's Word, have nothing to do with our circumstances. We can find contentment in that which transcends circumstances in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And again, we'll get to that in a few minutes. So first, you want to be discontent? Just be content when everything's perfect, right? And good luck with that. All right, number 2, forget about everything that God has done. So anybody have kids that have ever whined? Just a couple of us, right? So I have kids that like to do that. It's one of their favorite pastimes. We are, as missionaries, we do a lot of traveling. We do traveling when we're back here, visiting churches, visiting supporters, visiting family. We do a lot of traveling, to get here. We get on a plane that takes us literally from one side of the world to the other. We do a lot of traveling in Thailand for ministry purposes and for vacation. Sometimes missionaries go to beaches too, and we don't apologize for it. And we have some of the best beaches in the world over in Thailand. But what kills me is we'll be on our way to some of these most beautiful beaches with these awesome kids' water parks attached to them, or we'll be on a plane having lived in Thailand for the past 10 months, and we'll be on a plane to go see grandma, who we haven't seen in a long time, or see our cousins, and they're complaining on the plane, and they're complaining in the car. Right? And you guys know about this. And you can be on the way to Disney World and they complain. You're on the way home from Disney World and they complain. It's like, man, you just got to go to Disney World. Like, there's tons of kids, including mine, that they're not going to do that. They haven't done that. How are you complaining? And we do the same thing. We forget about what God has done. There's a guy in the Bible named David in the Old Testament, and he's the same David that slayed the giant Goliath, and then he fell in love with one of the king's daughters, and then the king eventually went after him and didn't want him to take his place and tried to kill David, and then eventually he does become king, and he then commits adultery, and then he commits murder to try to cover up that adultery. And then God, even after that, because he repents, he turns from that, God says, I'm going to give you an everlasting throne. But then his 2 sons die in succession. And he's like, well, how's that going to work? How am I going to have this everlasting throne when my sons are dead? And then he's given plans to build this temple where God is going to be with his people. And then he says, well, you can't build it. I'm just giving you the blueprints, but you're not going to be the one that builds this. You've got too much blood on your hands. And so David, at this, he could have complained. He could have counted up all of his problems. He could have forgotten about all the good things and just dwelled on the bad, but he doesn't. In Psalm 103, instead, he writes this, bless the Lord, O my soul, and forget not all his benefits. He forgives all my sins and heals all my diseases. He redeems me from death and crowns me with love and mercy. He fills my life with good things so that my youth is renewed like the eagles. So if you're like me, you often forget not all the bad, right? He says forget not all his benefits. We have this tendency to just dwell on all the bad stuff, all the negative stuff. We keep track of failures. We add up our problems. We tally up everything that stresses us out. And instead of being content and living with joy, we just keep getting more bitter about life. And what David knew and what we have to learn is this, that it's always better to count the good stuff and not the bad, especially when the good is really good. It's really good. So where I'm from, there are kind of two kinds of meditation, right? There's an Eastern meditation that we do in Buddhist countries like Thailand, and that's the kind of meditation where you kind of sit there and maybe you're Indian style and you go, you guys know about that. You've seen it in movies. Hopefully you haven't done that weird stuff. But what they're doing when they do that is they're trying to rid themselves of all of their thoughts, negative, positive, everything, and just be at peace with the world and just remove things from their mind. What biblical meditation is to think about all of the good things, think about who God is, think about what God has done. And I think this is sort of a lost art for Christians today. It's something that we absolutely need to get back to, spend some quiet time, and just recount. There's an old hymn some of us used to sing about count your blessings and know them one by one. We need to get back to that sort of thing. All right, so if you want to never be content, two things so far: conflate contentment with circumstances, and second, forget all of God's benefits. And here's a third thing we can do: don't see the big picture. Anybody here like to go to the gym? Anybody go to the gym, but you don't really like to, right? So yeah, that's a better question. Anybody here like to, or same thing, anybody like eat healthy food? Kind of like trying to watch, what you eat. So my wife does that. I'm in America. I'm going to eat what I want when in America. But when we did go to the gym, when I was a preacher back in Indiana, they gave us a YMCA pass. All good churches should get their preachers free YMCA memberships. So we did that, and it was, I didn't love it. I didn't love going there. I didn't love making the round trip there. But I could see the big picture. I knew, this is beneficial for me. I feel better. Maybe I look better. I don't know. But it was good. And down the road, I would be able to play with my kids for a longer period of time, right? I wouldn't get worn out. I looked at the long road ahead and said, this is beneficial. It hurts now. There's pain now. I don't love this, but it's beneficial. The same with eating broccoli, right? It stinks, but I promise you, it stinks in more ways than one. I promise you, it will be better than eating Twinkies, right? Which is like a delicacy that I bring to Thailand and share with my friend Choke. It's better for you in the long run. So when we eat sometimes and when we go to the gym, we can see the big picture, but in every other context of life, I can't really get past what's right in front of me. I have tunnel vision. I only see what's right here, right now, and it leads me to make awful decisions and get myself into many unnecessary pickles, right? Anybody here love to sit in traffic? Yeah, no hands raising on that. It's my favorite thing to do. In Bangkok, we have 15 million people, and at times we've been in the rain one day last year, and we were going just 2 miles, and it took 2.5 hours. And there was no way out. You're not turning right or left or anything else. There's just no escaping it, right? And we had the kids, and it was just a joyful family night, right? Joyful family night. So there are times, though, where you can escape it, right? And you can kind of hit end on Google Maps or Apple Maps. You can hit end and say, I know, I'm a guy, right? I get lead in my nose. I know that there's a better route, and then you do that, and 9 times out of 10, for me at least, it was not a better route, right? And we have the same tendency in everyday life, I think, to not see the big picture, to make rash decisions, to make messes where there otherwise would have just been minor glitches, right? Just little hiccups, all because we're looking at artwork before it's finished. We're looking at globs of paint on a canvas that aren't beautiful yet, but they will be. And so what we have to remember is this, that any frustrations that we have, anything that's going on in our life, any confusion, any fear, any doubt, anything in your life and mind that just seems out of whack right now, it's not the finished product. We don't have before us the masterpiece. And this is exactly what Paul, again, gets at when he writes to the Corinthians. He says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may be evident in our bodies. Yes, we live under the constant danger of death because we serve Jesus. So I talked about, all kinds of bad advice. There's also this bit of bad news, right, in one sense. So here's what's true about all human beings, like for all times. Everyone suffers. Everyone is going to have heartache. Everyone is going to experience loss. Life is just generally hard, right? But here's the deal with following Christ. Serving Jesus means life is even more difficult. The Bible actually promises to the Christian that your life is going to be more difficult than the person who's not following him. Because you follow him, you're going to suffer more for your faith. But look where it leads, according to Paul. He says, as God's grace reaches more and more people, there will be great thanksgiving, and God will receive more and more glory. So in Thailand, man, we run into all kinds of stuff that is hard because we've chosen to serve the kingdom of God, in a foreign land where they speak a crazy language with 5 different tones. Because we've chosen to do that, we experience a lot of suffering, right? And just everyday life that you guys go through, sometimes that everyday stuff is harder. 3 months ago, my grandma passed away. We were in Bangkok, right? She's on the other side of the world. My family's grieving on the other side of the world. I don't know if you've lost a loved one when you couldn't be at the funeral. You cannot grieve, right? And then you go the next couple of months thinking, man, I didn't shed a tear for my grandma. But I didn't because I wasn't with my family. I wasn't there. It was so far removed from this. And I'm telling you, it's stuff like that is hard. We breathed in some of the worst air in the world this past February and March. Some of the worst air that you could breathe. We had to wear masks every day. Our kids had to wear masks when they went to school. That stuff, it can be hard. Now, you don't have to be in Thailand to experience that, right? You guys know about suffering too. It's hard to serve God wherever you are, to sacrifice wherever you are, to be mocked openly or discreetly by your peers, by your coworkers, by your family. It's hard to be all in for Jesus. If you really follow him, you really love him, you completely give yourself to him, it, I promise you, is going to be hard. But look where it leads, according to Paul. More and more glory. More and more people coming to know Christ. And that's exactly why Paul can say this. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For this light, momentary affliction is preparing for us an eternal weight of glory beyond all compare. So there is a cost to following him, but there's also a payoff. And when we see the big picture, more people coming to know him, God receiving glory, when we can see that, whatever this is in front of us, we can know, like Paul, it's a light, momentary affliction. This dude was beaten. He was stoned, like to the point of death and left for dead. I mean, you can read through some of his letters and read his own statements about the things that Paul himself had endured, right? And he's like, yeah, that time they beat me to the point of like an inch of my life. It's just a light, momentary affliction. No biggie, right? He can say that, and we can say that no matter what it is, because he sees and we can see the big picture. So don't look at this, don't see the big picture, and you can remain discontent, right? So that's the third thing. Here's the fourth, and we'll be really quick, and it's very clear, isn't it? Live as a practical atheist. Have you heard this term before? First service, not a whole lot of people. So I'll just touch on my life experience. So I used to be a fish head. Anybody heard of a fish head before? Not many of us. So there's a band called Fish. It starts with a PH and not an F. And they were a jam band that kind of followed on the heels of the Grateful Dead. Anybody heard of those guys? All right, yeah. So, think hippies, right? So fish heads are modern day versions of deadheads. So I was one of those before I was a Christian. And so I would go to all the concerts, all the shows within 150-mile radius of my house. I would drive out. They do 3-day concerts, and I just loved it. I was a huge fan. I had a tie-dyed shirt collection. I had a hemp necklace. I wore that thing every day. I did not have dreadlocks, right? Didn't do that whole thing. But I was a pretty big, hippie kid back in the day. But sometimes I would go to shows, and I would, outside of the show, they had what was called the scene, right, or the lot. And so 4 hours, maybe 8 hours even, before the concert began, think like tailgating for a Buckeyes game or something, there would be all the people that were going to be in the concert. They would be gathered out there doing what hippies did, right? And you can kind of imagine. So I would sometimes encounter other guys that would be wearing like a Fish t-shirt, and they looked the part, and then we'd get into a conversation, and I'd be like, hey man, what's your favorite jam? What's your favorite song that Fish ever played? And they couldn't name a song. And I'm like, dude, you're rocking the shirt, man. Well, what's your favorite album? I don't know. What other shows have you been to? What other cities, man? What was your favorite show that you've been to? Oh, this is my first one, and I'm actually just staying out here and not going to the concert. You're like, dude, in what sense are you a fish head? Right? You're just here, and you look the part, and you're acting the part, and you do have dreadlocks, and those are nice, man, but, I wish I could do that. But in what sense are we the same? In what sense are you following this band, right? And Christians, you see the correlation. You understand now what a practical atheist is. It's a Christian, and maybe they do come to we could say concert. They come to the venue, right? They walk in, they sit down, they sing, they worship, they listen, but go through the everyday stuff of life, not thinking about Him, not thinking about His Word, right? That's what a practical atheist is. And you would look at this person and say, hey man, what's your favorite book of the Bible? Do you have kind of a life verse that you kind of live by? Or, hey, what's the gospel? And they're like, I don't know. Right? Do you pray? No, I don't know much about that. Oh. In what sense is that person a follower of Jesus, right? That's what a practical atheist, functional, practical. So I claim to love Jesus, to know Jesus, to follow Jesus, but in the everyday stuff of life, I'm nowhere near Him. And this isn't just like a person that might exist, every day. This could be my life. This could be you. This could be me, right? Tomorrow, here I'm preaching. Right? Here we're looking at the words together, and tomorrow I might wake up and might kind of skip out on devotion time and might skip out on prayer and might not think a thought about God or His Son or His Spirit. Right? So this isn't necessarily a way that you always live, but it's something that you can easily step into, and once you step into it, you're probably going to stay there for a long time. And if you want to be discontent, live like that. Live like that. Claim a relationship with Jesus and a love for Jesus, but don't actually live for Him. Don't sense His presence in your life on a day-to-day basis. And if you go through life like that, I guarantee you're not going to have joy. You're not going to have contentment. You're not going to be satisfied. And Paul, he speaks to this, Philippians 4. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all. Rejoice, for He is near. That's the key. That's the key. I shared this with the first service. We were on our way here, actually on our way to Starbucks, because my wife, she had to get some Starbucks. And the kids are fighting already. I'm like, man, don't you forget that great breakfast you had at the Holiday Inn, man. Like, remember your blessing. And so I said, pause. I'm going to pray. We got to stop what we're doing right now and clean this mess up. And I just said, I prayed and just reminded all of us in the context of that prayer, I mean, God is here. He's right here. He's not somewhere out there, somewhere over there. He's not back in Thailand. He's wherever we are. He sees it all. He hears it all. He knows it all. And man, I, for one, don't live like that every minute of every day. And we need to. We need to. So I want to challenge you to live right here in this moment in absolute acceptance of the fact that he is near, that the Father who made us, the Son who died for us, the Spirit who lives in us, they are as present as the person next to you is, right? And if you live that way, you will find contentment. You will find joy. I just think not enough of us, including myself, live in constant awe of this God, knowing that he is with us. So live outside that reality. Live as though he's not present. You will be discontent. All right, just one last thing I want to say, because we've given all this bad advice. I want to say something positive, right? If you do this, good things will come. So right here in Philippians 4, Paul says this: I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all things through him who gives me strength. We usually memorize the last part of that verse, but I love the middle part. I've learned the secret of being content in any and every situation. So Paul, he's, as we stated before, he's just not worried about what happens to be going on in his life right now. He's not waiting around for things to get better. He's actually having joy even when life is at its worst. And what makes that possible, not only for Paul, but also for us, is simple. It's the person and the work of Jesus Christ. So here's the thing. To the extent that you are overwhelmed by grace, you'll be overcome with joy. I didn't do this last service, but I'll try to be quick and brief about it. Just a little picture of my testimony. Some of you guys remember it. But when I was 16 to 21 years old, man, I partied every which way that a person could party. And I looked for joy, and I looked for contentment, and I looked for happiness and satisfaction wherever I might find it. I turned over every rock and went looking for that stuff, and it led me to just awful places. It led me to awful people, right? And it was just a very dark period that, if I told you the details, you would be like, get that dude off the stage. Like, that dude is crazy, right? That's what I went through. Some of my college friends, Joe, he knows all about it. He's just like, man, that's crazy. So I won't fill you in. You can ask Joe and some of the other guys about that. But basically, one night I was at a bar, and I left the bar. My girlfriend at that time, she was a bartender. That was a good thing for me at that time, right? But not really. I left the bar and went to a coffee shop. My friends had invited me. They were musicians, and they were playing in a band. The coffee shop happened to be a Christian cafe. I didn't know it. So I walk in, and I do not belong in that place because I do not have coffee on my breath, right? I have something else, much stronger. And I don't know how I got there, but I must have driven myself, right? And so I'm there in the coffee shop, and my friend from high school, his name is Brian, he's there in the coffee shop. And he doesn't judge me. He doesn't criticize me. He doesn't say, man, I can't believe you just walked in here, and how did you get here? You smell like alcohol. He didn't say any of that. He's just like, hey, man, I'm going to buy you a cup of coffee. And we sat down, and he asked me, and this is where it's relevant to what we're talking about. He asked me one question that I'll never forget. Matt, I know your life. He had worked with me when we were 18, 19 years old, and I was living that same life over and over again. And he said, do you have joy? Are you content? Do you have satisfaction? And that's the moment. Well, thereafter, he said, do you want it? Do you want to know how you can have it? And then he told me about the person and the work of Jesus. And I'll lay it out for those of us that need that conversation with Brian. I can't have that full conversation with you now, but let me say this. One way of illustrating where we are without Jesus is this. Suppose that there's 3 guys. What's the nearest river? Okay, so that river, there's 3 guys, and they want to swim across that thing. And the first guy, he goes like 1, I want to say meter, but you guys are like, what's that? He goes like 3-4 feet out, and he drowns, right? And the next guy, he swims about halfway across that river, and then he drowns. And then the third guy, and he's been swimming all his life, and he's a great swimmer. He goes all the way, and he gets within reach of the other side, and he drowns. Can the third guy look back at the other 2 guys and say, I'm less drowned than you? Nope, because he's drowned. And that's where we are. That's why we should be overwhelmed by the grace of God, because every one of us in this room, whether you lived my lifestyle or some other lifestyle that didn't have Jesus Christ front and center, we were drowned in our sin. We were far away. We were enemies of this God who came in and rescued us. And we should be as overwhelmed today as we were when we first believed. And if you are overwhelmed like that, you will always have joy, something the world cannot take away. If you're here today and you are a Christian, I want to motivate you, inspire you, be in his presence, fill yourself with his word every day, with prayer every day, with relationships with his people as much as you can. If you're here today and you're still in process and you're thinking about a relationship, I want to encourage you to come up. We're going to play a song. Andy's going to come. We're going to stand front and center here. And you don't have to do anything. You can. Andy will be glad to change clothes and baptize you this morning. But if you just want to have an initial conversation about what following Jesus means and what it looks like and what steps you should be taking, we invite you to come up this morning and we'll pray for you and talk to you. Everybody stand up.